Hello and welcome. My name is Evgeny Rusakov and you're watching TVP World, interview from Vilnius. Russia is heading towards another election, but the country's only political party that has consistently spoken out against the war in Ukraine has now been barred from the race. What does the exclusion of Yabloko tell us about the state of Russian politics? And what does it mean for those who still seek a political alternative? To discuss this, I'm joined by Konstantin Eggert, DW Russia analyst. Konstantin, glad to see you in our studio. Thank you for joining us today, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start by clarifying the definitions, shall we? What are elections in Russia? A sham, a joke, a formality, and how seriously should we take those elections in general?
Evgeny, thanks for the question. I think it's essential for understanding what goes on in Russia today. It is probably all of the above, but most of it is a tragedy because there are no elections. This is a coup of political theater organized by the Kremlin, and those 450 people that are going to be elected in quotation marks are just another 450 salaried members of Putin's presidential administration that imitate parliament. And in this respect, what you have now, for several election cycles, the Russian society essentially agreeing to the fact that there are no elections, that these elections are sham, that a significant part of the population is being told by their bosses, especially at state-owned enterprises, to vote in a very specific way and bring proof with photographs from the booth of the ballot paper. This basically creates a situation in which the society over the years is taught that elections are completely irrelevant, and that means that democracy is irrelevant. What is relevant is who is the boss, what are the bosses telling you. And in this respect, I would say even going further back than the late Soviet Union.
I would also say not who is the boss, but who is the tsar.
Yes, I would say yes, because everyone knows that there's no alternative to Putin.
Okay, then briefly, why does the Kremlin need that theater?
Well, because it's still not an absolute monarchy, and there is a need to show support for the regime policies, for the dictatorship's policies, via this plebiscite, via this popular, quote-unquote, vote, which is designed and always was designed, whether Yabloko was allowed or not allowed to take part in the elections, is irrelevant. It is designed to show that a vast majority of the population supports Putin's policies and supports his aggression against Ukraine.
Okay. Then how do you assess the exclusion of the Yabloko party from the elections?
Well, Yabloko, let's face it, it's a very moderate and modest opposition. If it was not modest and moderate, if it didn't know its place in the system, it wouldn't have been taking part in anything at all. But it calls for peace, and peace is, in a certain way, Putin also wants peace on his terms.
Sure.
I think that the idea of the presidential administration that is running the elections, it's not the Electoral Commission, it's not the parties, it's the presidential administration at Staraya Ploshchad address in Moscow that is running the show. I think that the administration thought maybe we should let the steam out slightly because things at the front are not going well. You have Ukrainian drones striking Russian infrastructure all over the place, including Moscow. So maybe, there are definitely people who don't like it for different reasons, but they do. So let us let the steam out. Let those people vote for this party which says war should be stopped, on which conditions that's a different matter. And then we'll say, well, 3% of the population voted for Yabloko, maybe 4. Well, that's the kind of anti-war votes, because all other parties, the communists, the former Zhirinovskyites, the so-called Liberal Democratic Party, of course, United Russia, Putin's party, they all are pro-war, they all are anti-Ukraine, they all are pro-Putin. So it's like one party. Sure. The same company with different departments.
Sure, with different names.
And I think that what then happened is that Russian political scientists in exile say, analysts say, it seems like the FSB interfered. The second directorate of FSB, which is called Director of the Protection of the Constitution, what a Kafkaesque name, and said, you know what, we cannot risk anything. During the war, you shouldn't open any sort of outlets for any kind of popular feelings. It should be a solid support. Maybe they brought to Putin some kind of information, exclusive as always with the FSB, that shows that Yabloko, I don't know, is financed by MI6 or something like that. And Putin said, no, I changed my decision. I'm not going to let them run. And I think that this, Evgeny, is very important, because I think what happened shows you that there are definitely conflicting views about supporting the regime among Putin's closest entourage, his closest collaborators. That's true. Doesn't mean it's the collapse of the regime, but it seems like they have their differences. And secondly, it also shows how Russia is run. Russia is run as, and it's essentially a dictatorship with a tsar, as you rightly said, and around the tsar is a royal court. And whoever comes to the tsar last has a day.
Okay, Konstantin, so during the 2024 presidential election, political
so-called election.
Okay, yeah, okay. During the 2024 so-called presidential elections, political strategists that were working with Russian president's administration said that Yabloko and its representatives could pose risks. In your view, what kind of risks were they referring to?
Evgeny, personally, I think that in 2024, there were fewer risks than today. Because at that time, the Russian society, I think the majority, still thought that this war is winnable. Ukrainian strikes against Russia were limited compared to today. And today, the war is in its 5th year. It's a different situation. And so the risks are higher. But the issue is whether the vote is honest or not. And because the vote is completely dishonest, in some ways, whether Yabloko takes part or doesn't take part in the so-called elections doesn't really matter. Because the outcomes are decided in the Kremlin and not by the voters. Today, if there was an honest vote, if the election was even marginally close to the ones they had even in the first 4 years of Putin's rule, maybe it would have been a different result. But the vote is completely rigged. And I want to stress it. The situation is very different from what it was even around about the annexation of Crimea. It is a different type of regime. These people over-insure all the time. Every outcome should be ensured like 300%. And that is how an imitation democracy is transforming itself into full-blown, non-imitative dictatorship. And I think this is what we see happening in front of our own eyes. I mean, frankly, I do not understand why in 2014, after the annexation of Crimea, Putin did not proclaim himself emperor. I think he would have been crowned. But
I thought you would say tsar.
Okay. Yeah. Well, but
yeah.
The Russians would like emperor, of course.
Okay.
And I think that it's really strange. I'm still baffled. I think at that time he would have been crowned. Today, evidently, the public opinion, logically speaking, cannot be the same as it was, let's say, in 2024, because Ukrainian strikes now disrupting Russian life. More and more people know someone whose relative, for example, was killed or wounded, maimed during the conflict. It doesn't matter that most of these people are mercenaries. And I think that in such circumstances, the constituency of those who want the war to end is growing. There's no doubt about it. The conditions of the end for the end of the war are debatable. I'm not certain that most Russians want to give back, the Crimea and the occupied territories to Ukraine. But for the war to end, this kind of so-called common man, probably he or she really, they want it. I think that Putin doesn't want to end the war. I think that Putin sees it as his historical mission to finish it with victory. And it will continue as long as he's in the Kremlin. And that means that there's going to be more and more and more reinsurance, so over-insurance of political outcomes inside his entourage until something breaks down.
And that is terrible. And that is terrible. Okay, now that Yabloko has been barred from the elections, what options are left for voters who do not support Единая Россия?
When there is no politics, as is in Russia, you either switch to, clandestine resistance and direct action, or if you cannot do it, and I understand, you don't want to risk imprisonment in Russia. There is no death penalty, it's suspended. But we know what happens in Russian prisons. So I can imagine that people who want to resist directly, I mean, there are very few of them. But to my mind, taking part in what is essentially called political theater, staged by people who have their own interest at their heart, but not the popular will, is actually corrupting democracy. It is participating in untruth, especially because all other options are essentially the same. If you're talking about the war, if you're talking even economic policy, nothing is decided in the Duma. As it says, 450 members of the presidential administration. They just call Duma members. And they vote, they do as the Kremlin tells them. So voting for, let's say, the Communist Party, which supports the war, for Rodina Party, which supports the war, for the so-called Liberal Democratic Party, for Zhirinovsky, who supports the war, even the so-called opposition or liberal opposition, again, completely constructed, which is called Novые люди, it's new people, a party recently created by the Kremlin. Even they're keeping mum on peace. So there is no choice, frankly speaking. Whatever you vote for is United Russia. You can spoil your ballot, but then you increase the turnout by just coming to the polling station.
So in your view, the best way would be...
And moreover, I think what the Russian opposition should have gone for, the Russian emigres, the Russian exiles, should have gone for a long time ago, is actually promoting active boycott of the elections. Active, explaining to people why they shouldn't do this and that. Also, you know, we live in Vilnius. You reminded me about the so-called 2024 presidential elections.
Yep.
At that time, parts of the Russian opposition, including the Team Navalny and others, were saying, well, you know, we have to show up at noon at the consulates, embassies
yes,
abroad,
I do remember that,
to show how many of us are against the war. And what happened? You had queues to the Russian embassies, and, you know, people, just regular Lithuanians, or for that matter, regular Berliners, regular Parisians, and regular San Paulistas.
Yeah.
We're looking at this and saying, well, they were saying that Putin is a dictator.
But
well, you see how many people want to vote.
The elections.
It's not dictatorship. Right. I think the effect was completely adverse. What you could do, you could put up tents near the Russian embassies and consulates and actively speak to people.
Not to vote.
Not to vote. Explain to them, debate them, show it done on TikTok, on social media. That would have been quite an interesting way of approaching these elections.
I do agree.
You can do a lot, but you can do something by explaining what the essence of the regime is. Because the regime wants people to come to the polling stations, to show that there is, quote-unquote, democracy in Russia. So I think that the active and well-explained boycott would have been a much better option in these circumstances.
This is a point. Konstantin, thank you so much for joining us today, and I really hope to see you once again in our studio.
Thank you, Evgeny. With pleasure.
Thank you. And I would like to remind our viewers that our guest for today was Konstantin Eggert, DW Russia analyst. You're watching TVP World. Stay with us.